New research says cold plunges don't work. This has been like the pendulum has swung to the point where you get a lot of clicks from bashing ice baths.
Thanks to Dr. Andrew Huberman and Dr. Stacy Sims, ice bathing has gotten quite a bit of attention in the last few years. So today I have on Dr. Tom Seager, who I really think of as one of the world's top experts on ice bathing. Not only did he use it to reverse health conditions himself, that doctors, of course, scratched their heads at, actually didn't even acknowledge, but he's also talked with many, many people in dire situations who have used ice bathing to cure chronic conditions and terminal conditions in some cases. So today we're going to talk about all of that. We even go deep into other topics at the very end, public health and other things I wasn't necessarily planning on talking about. So I really hope that you enjoy today's episode. Now, all of Dr. Seager's information will be down in the show notes for you, as well as a link to Morosco Forge, which is the company he owns now. And I use their products, absolutely love them. So make sure to check out all of that information down in the show notes. And I really hope that you enjoy this long, thoughtful conversation. Hello, everyone. I am so excited for today's episode. We're going to talk all about cold therapy, which has gotten a bad rap for women, I would say, unfairly. But we'll talk more about science. We'll talk about the female issue. But I'm excited to have Dr. Seager here this morning with me. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I've just watched your brilliant TED Talk because I was trying to brush up and understand your story. I think that would be a really great place to start. I think it would be really helpful for people to understand that, if you're comfortable giving us a Cliff Notes version of that.
Sure. It couldn't have been a TED Talk. I don't think I've done a TED Talk, but I did do a keynote at CryoCon. And
that's probably what it was. It was on your YouTube channel. It looked like a TED Talk, so I apologize.
That's quite all right. I've been there twice, and the first time I gave a broad overview. This was going back to 2024. I gave a broad overview about some of the misconceptions in cold plunge therapy and its science, and that was helpful. But in 2025, so this is a couple of months ago, I talked in particular about testosterone and what happened to my testosterone. Then during the question and answer, it always comes up. People are like, Professor Seager, you're an engineer. I teach in the Sustainable Engineering School at Arizona State. I'm a civil and environmental guy. What are you doing, on the stage talking about mitochondria, metabolism, and testosterone? And I tell them I had to learn about metabolism because when I was in grad school, I had just finished defending my dissertation. I had just become, Dr. Seager, and my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It was terrible because I didn't know what was going on with him. And of course, I thought of myself as a smart guy, but I didn't know anything about metabolism. I didn't know anything about insulin. I didn't know what caused type 1 diabetes. And I spent 25 years trying to decode metabolism, partly because I felt so damn ashamed about what was happening to my son, and partly because I had my own health crisis. This is when I was in my 50s, and I started getting my labs done. I'm like, I got to get serious about my health, and my PSA came back 7. Now, 7 is high. Normal for a man in his 50s would be 4 or below. 7 is associated with an elevated risk of prostate cancer. So any man who gets a 7 is supposed to report to his urologist and have a biopsy immediately. And I wasn't going to do that. I went on to WebMD. It took about 20 minutes to convince me that I was going to die of prostate cancer. And I'll be damned if I was going to go have one of those biopsies with so many false positives and a prostatectomy that would leave me impotent for the rest of my life. So I really got into cold exposure then. By that time, I understood how insulin worked. I understood what ketosis was. I'd already been through with my son, the Atkins diet. I didn't have a full appreciation of seed oils and a lot of other nutritional things. I didn't have a full appreciation of mitochondria, but I knew that I could handle inflammation and I might be able to beat cancer. So I went in and out of keto doing a little bit of intermittent fasting, doing a lot of keto, and I got into my ice bath every single day. It wasn't because I was trying to recover from my triathlon or get ripped or, hypertrophy or any of the other freaking things that you see on social media. I got into my ice bath every day because I was afraid for my life. And it took me about 4 months before I had the courage to retest my PSA. It dropped from 7 down to 1.8. A couple of months later, I tested it again. I had dropped it to 1.1. In other words, It worked. We know that ice baths are good for inflammation, and we know that ketosis is good for both inflammation, for mitochondria, and improves cancer treatment outcomes. So this was just kind of a crazy hypothesis on my end, in an attempt to avoid allopathic medicine. I brought my PSA down, and what happened was my testosterone went up through the roof. I was at somewhere around the mid 700s, which was very healthy for a fat college professor, in his 50s. But by the time I was done with this daily ice bath routine, I was up at 1180 nanograms per deciliter. And that is unheard of for a man, sort of with my demographic profile. So by this time, I took my lab reports to the urologist. I thought, okay, he's probably going to give me a medal or something because I've figured out, how to get my PSA down. He didn't care about any of that. He only cared about my testosterone. He was convinced that I was juicing and not telling him. And because there is this medical mythology that says, if you increase your testosterone, you will promote prostate cancer. That is the misconception, which is still pervasive throughout men's health. He said, I want to get you one more test. He sent me back to the lab to measure my luteinizing hormone. Now, keep in mind, this was several years ago. It was like 5 years ago. I didn't even know what luteinizing hormone was. Shoot, it was longer than that. Time flies, 6, 7 years ago. I had to look it up. I got my blood drawn. I got my test report back. My luteinizing hormone was 8.9, which is, again, off the charts. My urologist knew now that I was natural, and he never talked to me again. Like, he wasn't going to change the way he practices men's health just because somebody like me says, hey, ice baths can, reduce prostate inflammation and boost a man's testosterone. That sent me on a journey to understand what is happening in my body and the bodies of other men who are faced with these terrible choices where allopathic medicine comes along and says, well, we took 16 samples out of your prostate, 7 of them popped positive for cancer. We're not really sure, but we think we ought to take your prostate out just in case. And by the way, we're going to put you on testosterone blockers. We're going to effectively castrate you chemically, despite the fact that all the clinical evidence says high testosterone protects against prostate cancer. It is low testosterone that increases prostate risks. So I talked about that on the stage at CryoCon. It's sort of a subset of what I've learned about cold plunge therapy, mitochondria, and metabolism. And it's in this Uncommon Testosterone book that I launched several months ago so that men can read it for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation that needs to be had. And I see so much low testosterone these days. It's, I think, a major epidemic with men. Elevated estrogen, low testosterone is a much bigger problem, I think, than the elevated testosterone issue. I feel like that's more of an anomaly.
Agreed.
How is this helpful for those men? And do you see the same pattern?
The most difficult part of the low testosterone epidemic, I know it's not a contagious disease, but it has reached this level where men in their 20s are clinically low for total testosterone, which we'd never seen before. And the worst part of it is that their doctors are telling them that there's nothing they can do. Like, their doctors are saying, well, you must have some genetic predisposition or some other bullshit story, without telling the men why their testosterone is low. So what happens instead is men get these, like, bullcrap moralistic explanations. They say, well, your testosterone is low because you play too many video games, or your testosterone is low because you're not working out enough, or your testosterone is low because you're probably using porn, or, whatever these things are. They try and make it seem like there's some kind of moral behavioral transgression. And it's not that at all. It is the damage to the mitochondria that has become pervasive. It is the intrusion of seed oils into our diet that disrupt the function of the mitochondrial membranes. It is the poor light hygiene that now almost everyone suffers from. It is the lack of fasting or any kind of ketogenic cycle. And it's okay to binge on carbs every once in a while. As long as you bring yourself back with ketosis or with intermittent fasting, you'll be fine. Carbs are a hormetic stressor for your mitochondria. But carbs without a break, like constant, chronic, excessive carbs, of course they will damage your mitochondria. And it is inside the mitochondria where testosterone synthesis, and by the way, all sex hormone synthesis originates. It is on the inner mitochondrial membrane where a cholesterol molecule is cleaved by an enzyme into a sex hormone called pregnenolone. And it's from there that the whole metabolism, including cortisol, of all the sex hormones, originates and then sort of cascades. If your mitochondria aren't right, or you don't have enough mitochondria, of course you have low T. And so these men report to their doctors, talking to their endocrinologists or whomever, and say, well, it looks like we got to get you on testosterone replacement therapy. And there are some men who need it. It is incredibly beneficial. You get an immediate lift in mood and energy. You get a small improvement in your body composition. Your libido comes back. Your whole life gets better. The problem is that even if you're taking HCG to maintain sperm production while you're on TRT, your gonads will atrophy. And so you take a 25, 29-year-old man and you put him on TRT. He feels better right away. And 5 years later, he can't even make his own testosterone. What the medical establishment does with this lie is create a patient for life. And there is nothing more profitable than a young person who now depends upon your pharmaceutical for the rest of your life. Ask me, because my son was 6 when he was diagnosed, and there is no substitute for human insulin, and there is no cure for type 1 diabetes. But we can reverse low T, and we do it by using therapies that target the mitochondria. There are now dozens of successful case studies. Several of them are really well documented, before, after labs, that kind of thing. I've put them in my book in case people have doubts, but I've also put some negative case studies. That is, the people who tried ice baths didn't get a boost in their testosterone, and they want to know why. It's because they're taking other medications that interfere with testosterone metabolism, or they were on TRT for so long that their testes atrophied and their body is having trouble coming back from that.
If you've been watching the show for a while, you know I'm a diet and lifestyle person first always, but there are a couple of things I add into my daily routine that enhance my energy, my mood, my sleep, and even hormone balance. And one of those at the top of that list is Shilajit. Now, when it comes to Shilajit, there are a lot of brands on the market. I chose Black Lotus Shilajit because they test their products for heavy metals and they're very, very conscientious about their sourcing. They're also a small family-owned business and make sure that they deliver a quality product. Now, I use the Shilajit tablets every single morning, and there are actually a host of studies that show it can help with hormone balance and even reduce things like hot flashes. If you're interested in trying out the Black Lotus Shilajit, go to blacklotusshilajit.com and use code Sarah K for 15% off anything on the entire site. I personally love the tablets. I'm not a big fan of the resin, but you can try either one of those, again, going to the website www.blacklotusshilajit.com and use code Sarah K for 15% off the entire site. I'll be honest, this last year, I've definitely noticed some signs of aging as I am 46 in June, and I'm always looking for natural, holistic ways to support my body. I've been a big fan of red light therapy for many years now, and recently started using the Bond Charge face mask to help my body produce its own collagen. Now, here's the thing that differentiates Bond Charge face mask from the rest of the ones on the market. It has specific wavelengths that are actually meant to target the skin and collagen production. It has been shown to reduce fine lines and wrinkles, and it is low EMF. So it's very safe to use. When you're actually going to have a device on your head, you want to make sure it is the lowest EMF possible. I have tested this with my own EMF meter and believe it is safe and recommend it to clients. So if you're interested in checking out the Bond Charge face mask, I have a special discount for podcast listeners. You can go to bondcharge.com and use the code Sarah Kleiner, all one word, for 15% off site-wide. I really love the Bond Charge red light face mask. And if you're looking for more natural ways to support your body in this age and stage of life, I recommend checking it out. Go to bondcharge.com and use the code Sarah Kleiner, all one word, to save 15%. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I talk about with women when they want to start HRT, which I'm not against. I'm not somebody who stands against HRT for women. I think sometimes it can be tremendously helpful and life-changing. But what I think a lot of women don't understand is that when you introduce a hormone to the body, like testosterone, it does shut down your production of it. And I've seen women be able to bring their testosterone. We don't need to have testosterone as high as a man, but I've seen women in their 50s and 60s have bring their testosterone levels up naturally when they put a focus on the mitochondria, a light environment, diet, lifestyle. So it is possible. And when you introduce a hormone, like I said, it doesn't just raise the hormone and everything goes, you go on about your way. You're shutting down endogenous production in the body, and there is always going to be some sort of a downstream effect to that, right?
So before we put a woman on testosterone or hormone replacement therapy, doesn't it make sense to try and fix the mitochondria? Doesn't it make sense to try and fix the metabolism for, like, give it a month or two, and then instead of creaming you up or injecting you, or because there are no FDA approved testosterone therapies for women, any clinician who wants to use testosterone in a therapeutic setting must adapt a male prescription, a male protocol to the female body. It's a little easier after menopause, and there can be a lot of benefits. But couldn't we just maybe fix the environment first and see how far that gets us? Because I've got 2 case studies of women in this book who have adopted a practice of cold plunge therapy and boosted their testosterone. One of them, early 30s, and she's thinking about hormone balancing because she hasn't had kids yet. And the whole world is telling her, oh, you're 32, you're going to be a geriatric pregnancy in a couple of years. Your fertility is going to fall off a cliff. You got to take care of this stuff. She nearly doubled her testosterone. She increased her estradiol as well. She doesn't have anything to worry about, because as long as a woman will take care of her mitochondria and her gut, her metabolism in toto, she can conceive well into her late 30s. There are even women, posting under my Instagram or writing me letters saying, I'm 44 and I just got a surprise. Congratulations, because fertility it's built on a foundation of metabolic health. You will not improve your metabolism by taking an exogenous hormone. And I say that, maybe it's a slight exaggeration. There are some things that will improve. Cardiovascular health can improve when you fix a low T situation. But the way to fix the metabolism is not to cover it up with exogenous hormones. The way to fix the metabolism is to use therapies that target the metabolism.
Yeah, and that's the thing I see with a lot of the estrogen talk, which I'm definitely going to talk more about that on the podcast. I've got some guests lined up to talk about the whole estrogen thing, because there are so many doctors now that I think they're pressuring women into starting estrogen therapy, which there are some touted benefits to that. But we also need to take into account the mitochondria. We need to take into account some women that may not be able to detox estrogen properly, and understand that there are always going to be risks to this. And if you fix the metabolism, if you stabilize blood sugar, because blood sugar spikes and swings are going to lead to things like hot flashes, spikes in estrogen or even low estrogen. If you get blood sugar stabilized, if you fix leptin and tend to the mitochondria, I've had women that they're like, I don't want to be on estrogen, and they've come off of it, right? Or they've lowered their dose, or they've been able to delay adding it in. So I think that conversation around hormones isn't complete if we don't talk about the metabolism, because you're playing with fire potentially if you're just adding something in without supporting the system that is going to have to accept that hormone and use that hormone.
Doctors are so interesting because medical school trains them in what drug to take.
Exactly.
The vast majority of people don't want to take drugs. They wind up going to the doctor, but what they really want is, how should I live? And so they go to like the drug dispensary hoping for advice about how to live, but of course all they wind up getting is drugs. And so we have this whole now alternative wellness, unregulated, industry that the FDA can't touch, or maybe shouldn't touch because they ruin it, where people are looking for advice about how to live. The difficulty is finding trustworthy voices in that space. If Peter Attia says this and David Sinclair says that, and then here's Professor Seager, he just wants to sell me a $15,000 ice bath. So he's obviously not trustworthy. There are so many conflicts of interest in this sort of unregulated reputational space where people will say, no, I have a faculty appointment at Harvard, so my advice must be better than that engineer at, Arizona State. Nobody knows how to sort it out. Here's what really counts. Your results. When my testosterone went up, I put an article together. I said, hey, look at what happened to me. This is what I think is going on. And of course, I posted about it on Twitter. And it didn't take long for the Twitter trolls to come out and say,
I'm sure.
Right? There's no double-blind, peer-reviewed, placebo-controlled trial that says the thing that happened to you actually happened to you.
Because there's no money in it. There's no drug in it. Like, why would there be a study for something that there's no money? That's what they want studies. They want the scientific evidence. And I'm sorry, you're not going to get it for a lot of this stuff when it comes to your health if there's no drug involved.
Correct.
Period. It's not going to, the science isn't going to become available, unfortunately.
And why would you care? If it's working for you, that's what matters. All of those clinical trials, they are nothing but sources of hypotheses. You say, well,
Correct.
Here's a trial and we got a P factor 0.03 or whatever the heck it is. But are you in that 99% group for which they got, a statistically significant response? Or could you maybe be in that 1% for whom it didn't work, or the people who experienced adverse effects that make it not worthwhile? You don't know. Nothing matters but your N=1 experience. And so what we should really be doing is giving people the courage to experiment with things and find out what's working well for them.
Exactly. And I think the biggest, most powerful thing that people can do in this whole health and wellness space is learn how to decipher information. Learn how to read a study, learn how to look at data and say, does this apply to me? Or was this done in vivo, in vitro, which sometimes there can be value in those sorts of things. But you have to learn as a consumer, because I definitely am still looking for health information, trying to understand things, trying to learn every day. Where does this come from? Where does the information come from? And that's, I think, the most important skill people can develop in this day and age is.
And that's not easy.
No, it's not.
There are the censorship during COVID lockdowns that really complicated things. So even the people with qualifications who reside in the research institutions, as I do, were silenced, humiliated,
Mm-hmm.
criticized and
Mm-hmm.
segregated from society. So one of those is Jay Bhattacharya. He and I became friends during the lockdowns because we were both, faculty members who were speaking out against lockdowns. I gave Jay a copy of my first book. This is Uncommon Colds. And this is a compilation of all the articles that I've published on Morale's Coforge. It has 450 scientific citations. And Jay opens up my book, and of course, he's trying to be polite to his friend. And he's like, oh, yes, he goes, Tom, I think you have too many footnotes and citations in here. Nobody's going to read it. They don't want to see all this stuff.
But
And
you
I'm
have
like,
to do that. Like you have to do that if you're going to tell people this kind of information that's so against the grain. You have to substantiate it. That's why I never write an
correct.
article that doesn't have multiple citations in
Yep.
it. If I'm going to throw an idea out there that's against the grain, you just have to do it, you know?
He just did. That is, Jay just did a 5-hour podcast with Andrew Huberman. It came out this morning. He talked about
Wow.
peer review. He talked about NIH. He talked about censorship in science. But what Jay, I think, does not yet fully appreciate is what's called citizen science. And
Mm-hmm.
during the lockdowns, it was essential. People downloading the data for themselves. You know how all those Lancet frauds were discovered? You know how the whole amyloid plaque hypothesis collapsed on itself as a total fraud? Despite the tens of millions of dollars of funding from Jay's agency, not like he was in charge of it at the time, but he's now director of the NIH. And it was the NIH that was propping up the fraud that was the amyloid plaque hypothesis in Alzheimer's for a decade. It was all discovered by citizens who said, these images have been doctored. This data is phony. We can't fix science without decentralizing it. That is, we can't keep science subject to all the same centralized control, perverse incentives, and say, well, we just need some better people in charge of it. Those people will become corrupted because the incentives are structured that way. But when we open science up to allow citizens to participate in it, when we are metaphorically shining sunlight on the scientific process, now it becomes easier to bring the truth to light. And I don't think that Jay has quite fully appreciated that because he is in charge of one of the most important institutions of science. And as much as he wants to reform it, thank God he's there. I wouldn't take that job. And I do think that he's a wonderful person in the right spot for it. I can't rely on him. I
Yeah.
can't rely upon the NIH to get this right. We've got to keep sharing experiences and information and doing research and sharing that for ourselves.
You might have noticed a lot of viral posts about methylene blue lately on the internet, and there's a lot of fear that you could potentially turn your brain blue and cause toxicity issues. But what those articles aren't telling you is that those doses were 100 times higher or more than the standard dose. Now, I have actually been using methylene blue personally and have several clients that also use it. And when I choose my methylene blue, I choose Troscriptions because it is a physician-led company. They actually had 4 physicians that have used their real world clinical experience to develop extremely effective health optimization solutions. It's pharmaceutical grade quality because Troscription sources high quality ingredients globally, subjecting each to rigorous testing to ensure unparalleled purity and potency. It's easy to dose. These buccal troches are actually scored so you can divide them down into a tiny little dose to try it out. I use it for mitochondrial optimization when I've had a night of poor sleep or if I am flying. If you want to try out the brand that I use and trust, go to troscriptions.com/Sarah K for 10% off of your first order. That's TROSCRIPTIONS.com/Sarah K for 10% off of your first order. I agree. And I think that's, the people that listen to the show that have been around for a while, they are kind of on the ride for that. They're like, all right,
Agreed.
let's let's look at things differently because the mainstream way of doing things, the mainstream science, the way that science is upheld is not working. It's clearly
Yep.
broken. And there's clear corruption that is out in plain day for people to see. And it's like, if you're still following that narrative, if you're still buying in, then I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you. I don't know. I can't just
Centralized
make it
medicine
up.
had nothing for you, Sarah. Like, I've followed your story on Instagram and your transformation, and there was no medical doctor that you could have found who would have facilitated that for you.
Mm-mm.
People are taught by the institutions of medicine that they are not in charge of their own health. Every
Yes.
interaction that you have with your doctor or your HMO or your insurance company or with your employer or whatever says there are other people who are in charge. Well, you have to get this referral. Well, we have to get that approved. Well, we have to call the person and this is the copay and these are your options and you got to stay in the network and all whatever the heck this stuff is says
Yep.
you don't get to decide. And if you
Right.
stay in that system, you will inevitably be disempowered over your own health. You must leave the system. You must tell your insurance company to go F off, so that you can make your own decisions, knowing that there isn't anybody else who's going to live with the consequences but you. And that way you stay your own advocate. All these other people now become resources, sort of your advisory board for your own health and your own decisions. We must make ourselves healthy again. That's the only way to make America healthy again.
Yeah. It starts with yourself. You can't change everyone. You have to start with yourself. And I was listening to your talk this morning and related to you kind of just being hyper focused and so on top of your son and his medical care and his condition that you lost sight of your own health,
Yeah, I
having
got
a,
fat. It was
yeah.
terrible. You know, I knew carbs were no good for him. I knew what his insulin demand was. And I imagined, of course, that my daughter, who's 2.5 years younger than my son, of course, her body works the same way. And I said, well, we're not going to have any more Oreos in the house. There's no amount of insulin that I could inject into my 6-year-old child to prevent a insulin spike from an Oreo cookie. And yet the American Diabetes Association has said, oh, you can eat whatever you want as long as you bolus for it, as long as you shoot up for it or whatever. It's terrible. The American Diabetes Association is just as captured as any other institution. And yet what was happening to my body? I ballooned up to 250 pounds. I'm barely 6 feet tall. When I decided that I needed to do better, I was taking my children to the personal trainer. They were in high school sports and stuff like that. And I'm like, wow, Tom, you really let yourself go. I sat my daughter down at the kitchen table and I said, you know all this stuff about these exercises that you've been learning. And would you write some of them down for me? Because I want to go to the gym too. I want to start exercising. She said, Dad, that's great. She got out a sheet of paper. She's like 13 years old. And she wrote out at the top of it, the Fat Daddy Workout. And I felt, God, she's right.
Oh,
How did
it's
it
hard.
get here? I wanted to be like the Superman in my daughter's life forever. She knew I was fat. She just
Mhm.
wasn't saying anything.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
she wants to encourage me. And I looked at the Fat Daddy Workout and I said, thank you, Emma. I'm going to get working on these, right? Because I didn't want to be a fat daddy anymore. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still like almost clinically obese. You measure my body fat composition, I'm like 20%. I'm still a fat daddy. I weigh 210 now, not 250. And all the metabolic markers are in so much better shape. I've got good insulin sensitivity. My triglycerides to HDL are looking great. Like, I know I'm metabolically healthy. I wish I were ripped. I wish I could be like Ben Greenfield on Instagram, buy my ice bath, get my abs. Ice baths don't work that way. Like, they
No.
will not create that low body fat, that ripped subcutaneous fat look, but they keep me alive. So
Hmm.
I'm never gonna be an Instagram model. I'm still gonna have super high testosterone and good metabolic health.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the metabolic health is really where it starts. And then, yeah, my birthday gift to myself is going to get back in the gym to lifting weights. I'm trying to stay accountable to it because after I had my son, I've just had like thing after thing with my kids. My daughter's health has been a mess, and that's been a whole thing I've had to research. And then a toddler. And so, Yeah, we got to take care of ourselves and put the oxygen mask on. I've got my ice bath. I do the things. My lab markers all look actually fantastic. But yeah, I got to go in there and start building that muscle back.
It feels good when you do it.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And I will ice bathe before I strength train, not after, because that's another thing all the Twitter trolls love to go
Atta
wild
way,
over.
Sarah. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
There was a Washington Post just did an article. Now, if it's in the Washington Post and it's related to health, you already know you should be doing the opposite. Like they are
Correct.
a captured agency, but they just did a new article and they said, oh, new research. The research they cited was 10 years old. And it says, new research says cold plunges don't work. This has been like the pendulum has swung to the point where you get a lot of clicks from bashing ice baths. It used to be back in 2022, Rogan started it and we were still all traumatized by the lockdowns. And he's like, hey, I'm doing ice baths. You could put up, a picture on Instagram of someone in an ice bath,
So
get 400
crazy.
likes, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now, Stacy Sims goes on the
Oh,
Huberman
God
podcast. She
bless.
goes on Diary of a CEO. She goes on Mel Robbins was the real nail in this coffin. Mel's a customer. Mel's got a Morosco. She has sung the praises of ice baths. She loves it. And yet, when Stacy Sims goes on there, she goes, well, I don't really like cold for women. We should probably not be doing temperatures that are as cold as what the guys do. Mel's like, oh, thank you. All the comments under that headline that misrepresents Stacy's comments and says, cold plunge is bad for women.
Hmm.
The replies come back in two ways. The first one is, I don't know what Sims is talking about. Like, cold plunges has saved my life. I was depressed. I started doing cold plunges. It lifted my mood. I lost a little bit of weight. I've got so much more energy. Why would she say they're bad when they're so obviously good for me? That was one set of comments. And then there was the other set of comments that go like this. I knew it. I've never done a cold plunge and I never will.
Those are the ones I would expect to see more of because it's like, yeah, it's hard. It's
Yep,
hard. It
that's right.
takes uh it takes a lot to get yourself in that cold water. Of
Yep,
course, you want a reason to not try it.
yep.
Yeah, that's what I would expect to see out of today's commentary. And yeah, there's been a lot of negative press about cold plunging for women. And I'm always the first one to talk about my story because that was the thing when I had two miscarriages, two failed rounds of IVF. We had cashed a bunch of money out of retirement for. And I was like, well, looks like I'm going to be going to the grocery store. I would go to the grocery store and buy cartons of ice. And the cashier is like, what the heck are you doing? You're back in here buying more ice. Because I had a little portable Amazon tub and I'd pour food grade hydrogen peroxide in there. I'd use the filter for the bathtub filter and fill that thing up and get in there 3 times a week. And I'm telling you, I screwed up the first month. I did it too much, too often, too long. But that second and third month, like, I think if I hadn't done the plunging the 2 weeks during the 2 week wait, I think I would have got pregnant quicker. But I learned by that third month, all right, you cold plunge all the way up until ovulation and then you stop if you think you might be pregnant. And it was that January of 2022, I got that positive pregnancy test that I had been trying to get for years. And now I've got my son as the proof. Um, and my testosterone had been like since I was 35 undetectable. When we're talking about
Mm,
testosterone, I had undetectable testosterone starting at age 35, got it up to like I think a 40, which is not like
mhm.
high, but
No,
I'm
it's
not
good though.
it's good for a woman. I have the labs from right before I got pregnant. My testosterone was a 40, and I didn't take any testosterone. I didn't do any HRT. I got it that way through ice bathing, through lifestyle, through diet, through sun exposure, all the things I teach about. And so women can knock on it. I think the women that say it doesn't work are doing it too long, too often, too cold, and not really paying attention to stress levels. I think it's multi-layered. I think there's a benefit to it for most people. It's just like you have to do it. You have to do it right for your body.
There are very few people like they've never written to me, I don't see them on Instagram, who say, I tried cold plunging for a few weeks and my health got so bad I just quit. It didn't work for me, so I stopped. The reason that there are very few people, or I don't encounter them, is because they're not there. There are people who say, I was doing cold plunging and then I moved. Or I was cold water swimming with some friends and then my schedule changed and I couldn't go anymore. Like, there are people who start cold plunging and they stop. There's no one of all these clickbait popular accounts who says, oh, it's the worst thing you can do. Cold plunging is like a plane crash or some other crap. None of them have posted labs that say, this is what my blood markers look like before I started doing ice baths. This is what this is my cortisol before. This is my cortisol after. This is my, take your pick, insulin levels before, and this is my insulin. There is nobody who says cold plunging failed to improve my physiological and psychological health, and so I stopped doing it. There are a lot of people who have said, I hate being cold, and so I want you to come up with a better answer. When we talk about fertility, this is really important because fertility is such a great marker of overall health. In men, and I'm going to get to women next, but in men, erectile dysfunction is the first clinical sign of metabolic disorder. People don't know this, partly because the medical profession got it wrong. Of course, an erection depends upon blood flow, so you have to have good blood flow. The endothelial cells that line the blood vessel, they are responsible for producing the nitric oxide that signals the smooth muscle tissue to relax and dilate. And the relaxation of the muscle is actually more energetically intensive than the contraction. So all of this we understand. But medical doctors used to think that those endothelial cells did not rely upon mitochondria for that nitric oxide production, and they're wrong. And this is just a few years ago. A new paper came out and said, hey, look, the endothelial cells need healthy mitochondria to promote vasodilation. When the mitochondrial function is impaired, the man does not have sufficient blood flow to maintain an erection, which is why it is the first clinical marker. Erectile dysfunction is the first clinical marker of metabolic disorder. That's the men. And we're not even talking about testosterone and the essential role of mitochondria in testosterone. When it comes to women, the most metabolically intensive thing a woman can ever go through is pregnancy. And the second most would be breastfeeding. And so your advice was spot on. When you do a regular practice of cold plunge, you stimulate mitobiogenesis, you increase the mitochondrial content, and you increase the quality of the mitochondria in your cells. And this is typically throughout your body. You will recruit new brown fat, and new brown fat is packed with mitochondria. And that's, a wonderful thing. But it appears that the mitochondria throughout the body respond to the stimulation. It's a hormetic stressor of the cold plunge. When that happens, your fertility improves. That is, you no longer need the IVF to conceive. And your ability to carry the baby to term improves. That is, pregnant women who cold plunge experience better birth outcomes than those who do not. And the reason is a pregnant woman becomes naturally, physiologically insulin resistant during the pregnancy. All the growth hormone coursing throughout her body interferes with the action of insulin. And so the pancreas will make more insulin to compensate. But a physiological insulin resistance can tip into pathological insulin resistance when you are already starting with metabolic impairment at the beginning of a pregnancy. So to become pregnant, you use the cold plunge until you're expecting ovulation, a day or two beforehand, or right up to the moment you're expecting to ovulate. Back off the cold plunge. The cold plunge will activate your immune system. And the last thing you really want is an overactive immune system. If you've got that fertilized egg and it's got to implant in the uterine wall, give it a few days before you rev up the immune system again. You can go back to cold plunging after a week. And even if you think you've conceived, in which case congratulations, and you can hold off for a few more weeks if you want. You can start the cold plunging again after implantation. And what it does is reduce the inflammation that is typical late stage pregnancy when the women have swollen ankles, which is an indication of preeclampsia, which is a metabolic disorder, which heaven forbid it ever turn into eclampsia, or gestational diabetes, or placental insufficiency, or any of the complications that are related to insulin resistance during pregnancy. It helps with all of these. It helps with stress, and it helps with sleep, which is another problem that pregnant women experience, particularly in their last trimester. So when I hear cold plunge is bad for women, I put up a response, and it was something like, look, here's the 7 good reasons why, and I forget how many we had, but no, it's not. It's a wonderful thing for women to do. The data that shows women are more sensitive to cold than men, it's not unreliable data. It fails to explain why. Women who are cold trained are more tolerant of cold than men. And when women are naive to the cold and they begin cold training, they improve even faster than men. There is no underlying chromosomal reason to believe that women are more sensitive to the cold than men are. The fact is, men are outdoors more, men get cold more, men work more outdoor jobs. As a population, men have more experience with cold than women do. And those statistics say nothing about any individual woman and the extent to which she's acclimated to the cold. So I'm really frustrated by this misleading social media headlines that try and encapsulate something into a way overconfident expression. But the only people listening to it are the people who don't want to do it anyway.
Right. That's the thing. And what gets me the most is this whole conversation of it's too stressful. And I actually had some guy, and it was really funny. I actually found it really funny on my Instagram. My partner, Carrie, and we did a podcast about cold therapy for hormones and cold therapy for fertility about 6 weeks ago. And I posted one little clip on Instagram, and this guy just went off on it. And he's like, it's a stressor. You don't understand what you're doing. It's a mitochondrial. It's going to cause damage. And I look on his page, and he is a bodybuilder. And I'm like, do you realize that what you're doing with lifting weights for your body, you are putting a stressor on your body and getting growth, getting muscle growth, is essentially the same thing of going into an ice bath. It's like
if you don't get a cortisol spike when you work out, you don't get muscles. He evidently doesn't understand the principle of hormetic stress.
Right.
Temporary, acute. There's exercise and recovery. There's light and there's dark. There is sleep, and then there is wakefulness or activity. Mm-hmm. There is feasting and there is fasting. We are meant for this kind of variability. And so when he says, oh, you're going to stress your body, he's absolutely right. That is absolutely the point.
What are you doing to get those muscles, my friend? That's exactly what I said. I said, well, I don't think you understand how this works. Let me give you a lesson on hormesis. The conversation is very one-sided, and I do think it's people that don't want to do it. They don't want to fast. They don't want to keto. They don't want to do the hard thing. Because if we can find a reason to tell people it's bad for them, then they won't have to do it. But there's nuance in the conversation. Yes, you can do, as I figured out the first month of cold plunging, because it felt so dang good. I was like, oh, I can do 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening every day. Mm-hmm. Okay, why the heck did my period completely just go missing? Mm-hmm. Because that was way too much. But 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, 3 times a week, boom, my body is like, I'm losing fat, I'm feeling good, I'm having more energy. Oh, my testosterone's going up, and then I get pregnant naturally. And so there is a dose, and you don't want to fast. You don't want to be in ketosis all the time.
Correct.
This is my issue with the people that say you should do carnivore forever. I'm like, disagree. I fell into that trap myself, and that it was the first thing that I had to quit in order to regain my fertility, was being in ketosis 100% of the time. So we're not meant to live like that. It's not always winter. It's not always summer. There's periods of feast and famine and cold and warm. And that's just how the human body is meant to adapt and to be healthy, right?
Do you think my grandmother would have turned down blueberries? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
In season, eat the fruit. Take the peach off the tree. It's so delicious for a reason. It wasn't put up there by some McDonald's food scientist to addict you to like whatever is happening in your body. It tastes great because it's good for your body. Unfortunately, at the grocery store, you're so out of contact with your food. All of those ingredients are meant to fool your instincts rather than reinforce them. So I think Sean Baker is great. I think, he's a wonderful example. He's out there proselytizing for carnivore. He's like, I haven't had anything but a steak in 6 years or whatever. And he's in great shape. And I'm not going to turn down blueberries in season. If your blueberries are coming from Chile or Argentina, and they're trucked up to Phoenix, Arizona, where I live, in January, I'm not touching them. They have no business being in my body. I live in the desert. I'll eat the salmon during winter. I know it's coming from a long way away. I'm not really meant to live
different with the light coat,
downtown Phoenix, right?
Yeah. I think it's different with meats and seafood.
And your advice is right on. When you say I did 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening, and my period disappeared. There are other ways. Sometimes ballerinas lose their period because they are working so hard. Another way to completely lose your period is to train for that ultra marathon. Because when a woman's body is so stressed without recovery, everything is going into the exercise or the performance, and there's no room left for reproductive health. The same thing can happen to men. A good way to plummet your testosterone levels is to work out way too hard and way too often. And you think, this must be doing great for me. No, it's not. Your body is under such constant stress that it looks to conserve metabolically wherever it can. And one of those things it will do is shut down testosterone production, shut down sperm production, because they're like, evidently, we're in some kind of constant crisis. And we've got to deal with that before we can get back to the business of reproduction. So the hormetic stress curve is an upside down U. It's hard to draw. So you got to imagine, and it says like this: if you don't get enough of something, that's bad for your health. When you get a little bit, your health goes way up. And then when you get too much, it's bad for your health again. And we see this over and over and over again in every kind of aspect of our lives. Not enough sleep, terrible. You get your 7 to 9 hours, terrific. You stay in bed all day, terrible again. We know that this upside down U curve exists in everything in our life. And yet sometimes people oversimplify the complexity because they can't get their head around it. They don't want to work to understand it, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I think that's, again, back to deciphering information, learning how to understand, where is this message coming from? Why is this person saying this? And it's a continual learning process, honestly, because I've renounced this. Oh, that sounds really good. And then I dig a little deeper. I'm like, no. I would love to direct people to your work. I know you've got a couple of books. You have a podcast. Where can people find you, your work, and all the wonderful information that you put out?
If you're interested in testosterone and sex health in general, then go to Amazon and get Uncommon Testosterone. Now, you can read the articles. I put them all up at morozcoforge.com. Some of them are on Seager TP on my Substack. You can follow me on Instagram. If you want to see a 59-year-old man up to his ears in chunks of ice talking about mitochondria, follow me on Instagram. I'm on Twitter at Seager TP, where I test a lot of new ideas. Twitter's a microblogging thing. And but all of my writing is ready to be read for free at morozcoforge.com. If free is not your thing, then go to Morosco Forge and pick up Uncommon Cold, because that's where it's all sort of bound together. You can write in the margins and put sticky notes in the book like I do, and sometimes that's a lot more convenient than scrolling through it on your phone. So I'm out there. We have a YouTube channel and we have a podcast called Uncommon Living. Uncommon Living is not about ice bath per se. The point is that it is too common to be sick. Most men my age are already on more than one prescription medicine. We do not want common lives. We do not want to be normal. It is uncommon in America to be healthy. And so the podcast is scientists and medical doctors and patients and parents talking about what you don't get in your doctor's office, and that is how to live your life.
I love that. Very powerful. And I'll make sure I have links for all that in the show notes so people can follow you. And the ice bath, if they are ready to jump in, get one, I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Terrific. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that cold plunge is critical to health.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not the only thing, but we are wired. We are biologically made to expect the cold. And if you don't give your body what it's made to expect, of course, your body gets sick.
Agree. 100%. I love it. Well, thank you so much for all your time today. This has just been a fantastic conversation. So many things. And I hope people will follow you and your work. And we're going to connect in a few weeks at the Return to Nature retreat. So, yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to the Evolving Wellness podcast. Just a quick little reminder, this is not medical advice nor meant to be taken as a substitute for working one-on-one with a healthcare practitioner. And if you enjoy the show, please head on over to Apple or Spotify to leave the show up to a 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, please leave us a like, leave us a comment. I really appreciate you for being here, for listening to the show, and your support means the world to me as I continue to try to pull guests from around the world to bring you informative content to empower you to make decisions about your own health. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.